Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, The Artful Colorist. I'm Tessa. I wanted to just talk to you guys a little bit about Copic Sketch markers and Spectrum Noir markers. I wanted to point out these are both double-ended. The Copic comes with a brush nib and a chiseled nib on the ends. And the Spectrum Noir marker does come with a bullet nib, not a brush nib, so it's a little bit more fine and more stiffer nib on one end, and then it has a chiseled nib on the other end, just like the Spectrum Copics do. Today I wanted to talk to you guys about the difference of using higher quality markers instead of just your basic Crayola markers. You'll notice that I have two different types of paper here. I have the HP Premium Laser 32-pound paper. It's just a copy paper, and I'm going to show you how the two different markers work on this paper. And then I also have the B Paper Super Deluxe watercolor paper in a 93-pound. So I'm going to show you a couple things with them and explain to you what is going on here. So with let's do the premium, the HP Premium Laser paper, and here's the Copic. And I want to show you a couple things. When you're laying down color on a new type of paper, always do a test and hold it for a couple seconds, and notice how far that bleeds out from your original mark. Also with the Spectrum Noir markers, they do the same thing, and they will kind of bleed out. Hold it for a couple seconds. I find that the HP paper really does a good job of not bleeding too much when you're coloring on it or creating art. The B paper, I find that it is more porous and it does soak up more of your ink, and you'll find that it does bleed out more, and you'll have that kind of issue to think about when you're using this kind of paper or using a watercolor paper for your markers. It will soak up your paper, and it can be a little bit more on the aspect of that when you're trying to get fine detail, it may not work for this, or may not work. And see how it kind of feathers out at the edges from the ink where you laid it down? I find that that can be frustrating for some people. So what I normally use for coloring is I use the paper that comes in my coloring books from Angie Grace, and I find that it's a pretty decent paper. It's not like a Bristol board or your regular kind of marker, like Express-It blending card marker paper. I'm not a really kind of the person who likes to use a heavy paper, and that's why I kind of really do appreciate the HP Laser 32-pound paper, the premium. For me, it doesn't do this feathering, or it doesn't do a bleed out like this, and I like that. I like the fact that this HP is kind of more of what you want for your markers. It's a smooth paper. The ink doesn't really soak up too much when you're coloring, and it does allow you to blend. So I'll show you a real quick blending with the Spectrum Noir markers. And so here I'm going to lay down some color. And really kind of soak up your paper. Let's move this one out of the way so we can show you that. Good. And I always go back in my lighter color and blend the lighter two together and work it more evenly so it looks more consistent. And I kind of do circular motions too, kind of work those two colors out and into the surrounding area. I do think that this HP paper is good for just kind of basic layering, but if you really want a heavy layer, I don't think it's going to be something that you're going to want to use for a lot of heavy colors or heavy layering. because it does tend to not want to layer as well or blend as well as some of your more nicer papers. And you'll notice that when I am coloring, I go back and forth and I do saturate the area pretty well so that I know that I'm getting an even saturation on the back of my image, so that my color is being soaked in, the ink is being soaked into the paper well, and you know that you're going to get an even color and an even tone to your color when you're coloring. Here's the dark color in the Spectrum Noirs. And if you're curious of what colors I've been using the TB2, TB3, TB4, and TB5. That was the last color I laid down, was the TB5. I just kind of work that out and blend it out with the lighter color and work it across the dark color a little bit so you get it more blended. And I do like this paper because notice that I've used a decent amount of color or a decent amount of ink and I've soaked it in. Don't feel worried that when you do that you're gonna hurt or damage this kind of paper, because this paper actually takes ink really well, and it actually does. Let's see. It actually really does put up with a lot of abuse. You'll find that other types of paper, if you're using them, sometimes can't handle. So I'm going to work that out and work it back. Explain to you the Spectrum Noir and Copic both have a colorless blender. Don't be fooled by the name of it, because I don't think, for me personally, the blender is not, it's not a blending tool per se. It's more, for me, how I use it is like, if I wanted to come in here and I slowly push the ink back into place, or kind of fix mistakes, that's how I use it. I kind of use it as an eraser. Notice that, like, if I let that sit, I can actually take and push the ink out of that area that I'm using the colorless blender on and almost get it to be where it looks like no color's ever been in it. And if you want, you can dab in that area and even push more ink out, and then you have more of a, like that. And I just don't find that what everybody is being fooled by, that it's being a blender. It's really not a blender. It's more of, I find it more, for me, as a corrector or an eraser. Like right now I'm showing you, I'm kind of pushing the ink out again to kind of fix my mistakes, if you like to say that. I do it because I like using it to clean up my images when I'm coloring and making sure that I'm just the kind of person that really wants everything to be perfect, and I know that sometimes things always can't be perfect. I try. And so I use that to kind of go around and clean up some of my edges. And I'll show you that on another coloring that I'm doing right now. I have a little dot right here of ink, and I want to show you what I'd use the colorless blender for. So here is how I do it. I dab, 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 dab until I see no more colorless, or no more ink. It'll dry and you won't notice it. I don't know if you can see, but like right in this area here, how it's kind of feathering out. I go up to it real close, but I don't really go on top of it, and I push it. But be careful that you don't push too far, because you can spread the colorless blender out into your image, and you will notice that you'll get a little bit of pooling or lightening of your areas. I don't really use it as a blender. Some people say that they do and they like it. I, for me, like to use my inks to blend and to make sure that I'm actually blending with the colors, not just the colorless blender. I've noticed that some people lay down a colorless blender and then go in up towards it and gives it a more feathered look. So I'll show you that on a piece of paper. The difference between the Copics and the Spectrum Noirs, I find, is the main difference is that, like I said, they have a brush nib, and I find that that allows me to do more flicking kind of motions and getting a better blend that way. So I can kind of go a little darker at the base and a little lighter at the top, and then I can take a lighter color and pull that in like that, and it kind of gives it more of a better blended look. The gradient is a little bit better. And then I kind of go in and I pull some of that darker color up with my lighter color, so that I make sure that it looks nice at the edge and it doesn't look like you have your, like that. And you'll notice that these markers, the Spectrum Noir and the Copics, will actually dry lighter than what they go down on the paper as. You'll notice that this, I used a W6, it's a warm gray number 6, and I used a warm gray number 4 for the lighter color. And you'll notice that this is the warm gray number 6 that I did the test to show you how far it bleeds out. I also want to point out and stress that you want to keep, if you're going to do a gradient or a blending, you want to keep them in the same color family. So like how I did the Spectrum Noirs, I did on here, I'll show you, I did a B, this is TB2, TB3, and then a TB4, and then the darkest color here is a TB5. So I want you to understand that this is in a color family, and when you say TB, and I kept it 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5. I wouldn't want to go like 2, 3, 10, 15, because that would be not in the same color family, because you have having the extra 1 in front of the 5 or the extra 1 in front of the 0 means that it's in a different color family, like not a different color family, but a different value in color. And Spectrum Noir is pretty good on keeping light colors. Unfortunately, I don't know why that one is very purpley blue, but we'll go from it. This, I do think that Copic's YouTube channel has a really good video that talks about the numbering system on their markers and why it's a numbering system. Let's say you had like G15. Well, you wouldn't say G15, you say G15, because the individual numbers represent different qualities of the marker. They do have a great video, so go check them out. It's their Copic channel on YouTube. That's the basic of the markers. The one difference is I find that the pigments in the Copic markers in any of their lines, the Chow, the Sketch, or the Classic, are the exact same inks and exact same pigments, and they work beautifully. They're almost like saying, these are the Spectrum Noirs are more of your Volkswagen, and these are your BMW. Don't get me wrong, the Spectrum Noirs are fantastic markers. If you want to get into using alcohol-based markers, but you're not sure you want to make the investment into the Copics, by all means, go for the Spectrum Noirs. They're fantastic. The company is great. Crafter's Companion will work with you if you have any issues with the markers. They're beautiful. I just find that I prefer, as an art major, I just prefer having just that little bit better ink and pigment in my markers. I find that the Spectrum Noir's ink is great, but it's thinner. The Copic ink is a little thicker, and it almost feels like you're painting instead of using a marker. That's my kind of why I like them. I have the full set of the Spectrum Noirs and I adore them. I have the full set of the Copic Chow markers and they look like this. Let me see if I can grab one. Here's one. So the Copic Chow markers are a little different. They're a smaller barrel than the sketch markers. For me personally, I don't mind having the smaller barrel. I don't mind it. I just went with the sketch markers because I know that I would like to have all 358 colors in the set. The Spectrum Noir markers only have 68 colors. 168 colors in the set. And the Copic Chows only have 180, and the sketch markers are available in 358 colors. And I like the fact that they're a little bit bigger barrel because they do feel more ink. And after using the Copic Chow markers for about 6 months now, I've noticed that I am starting to run out. And I find that if I'm going to be using them and investing in them, I kind of want to invest in something that holds a little bit more ink so that I'm not having to refill them as often. But do understand, each of these, the Spectrum Noir, the Copic Chow, and the sketch markers, I'm going to put that outside so I don't have 50 million markers, they are all refillable. You can refill them. You can replace the nibs on them. You can, if you damage a nib, you can go and get a new nib. I knew that Spectrum Noir sells them in a set with the chiseled nibs and with the bullet nibs together. I know that if you want, Spectrum Noir does sell separately. You can get the Spectrum Noir markers. You can get a brush nib if you want. They're kind of pricey. I think you get like 3 markers in a set, and it's about $6 for this 3 nibs. So if you really want to replace all of your markers with the brush nib, you can, but I believe that you can only, I believe the brush nib only goes in the chisel nib end, I believe. I'd have to take a look and do some research on that for you guys. I just want to show you real quick, and I'm going to pause the video and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you how I like to use the Copic Colorless blender and the Spectrum Noir Colorless blender. I want to show you how I use those to clean up an image. So I'll lay down some Colorless blender here and really saturate the ink. Make sure it's saturated. And then I'll come in with a lighter color, or come in with a color and then kind of go up to it. And you'll notice how if I do a stroke, it's kind of sharp at the end, where the ink meets the Colorless blender. You'll notice it kind of dissipates out. It kind of goes like that out, goes out, and it's not as a harsh line. And I'll come back with the Colorless blender to kind of feather out the edges so it's not as harsh. But you'll notice I'm not really blending. There was really no blending in that area right there. There wasn't any kind of blend. I'll do it again on the HP paper. Let's try to do it with a little darker color and see what that does. So I'm going to lay down the color first. If you can see if I'm in frame. Sorry guys, I'm trying to figure out my layout for my pictures and how to do it. I'm going to use the Spectrum Noir, or the Copic, because it's a little more inkier in. But you see how it kind of softens that edge right there? I don't know if you guys can tell. I'll do a close-up in a second. Kind of softens the color overall. Kind of makes it look a little bit more misty, and it defines it a little less. More feathered it looks and more softer it looks. That's what the Colorless blender does. I don't find that it's blending. I find that it is diluting almost the pigment or the ink, at kind of pushing it out and spreading it out. So for me, I don't really use it's kind of a misnomer with the name of being a colorless blender. It's not really a colorless blender. I use it for more like, let's say I want to take this little piece right here, this section, I'll show you this section right here. So once again, I'm going to show you how I kind of push the ink, and you'll notice, if you see that darker blue line? That's the pigment being pushed up into the paper and saturating and kind of being like taken up like that. That's the ink being pushed back up into the area we had we put the colorless blender over. And that's what you want to avoid, because like if you get too close to it, you will push it into other areas of your coloring that you may not want it to be in. And so look, notice how you can press down and hold and kind of dab it, so you're pushing the pigment, the ink through the paper. You can do that for the whole thing, and you can clean that up. That's how I use a colorless blender. If I make a mistake, or I want to do some kind of cool little texture on the image, or I want to add some kind of a look of maybe having a more misty kind of, sorry for the hand, a more misty look or more watercolor look. That's kind of what I use it for. But when this dries, you won't see the colorless blender in the background, and it will dry pretty well in this area, and all you'll really see is the blue ink. So that's my kind of overall thoughts about the colorless blender and the Copic sketch markers and the Spectrum Noir markers. My one thing is, if you really know that you're going to be coloring for a while or want to do art for a long time and you want to make an investment, I really do stress that don't feel like you have to go out and buy Copics. But you have the alternative to go, and you can get the Spectrum Noir markers. You can find that. So there's that. And also, I want to show you an up-close view of the nib. So that's the chiseled nib. Or, yeah, not the chiseled, the bullet nib on the Copic, or the Spectrum Noir marker. And then here's the other end of the chiseled nib, if I can get that correct. I find that I like this when I'm creating color palettes or like color charts for the colorings that I'm doing. I find that having the bullet nib, I'll use that to lay down some color like that. And then I go back and I can say, okay, I like that color. And then I go back and say, oh, maybe I want a lighter color. So I go back and I add, or a darker color, and I go add, and I kind of go over it a couple times, and then I write the number on them. So I'll go, well, this was TB3, and this was TB1. And that's how I do it. And then I can have all of my colors on one page, and then I don't have to keep going back and trying to find them on my color chart that I make. I made a color chart for each of these markers, and yeah, that's something that I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth in another video, but I find that helps me. And I show more, and I talk about more of palettes, or color palettes, or color charts for individual colorings. I made a video about the palette, so I go more in depth in that. So if you want, you can go check out my old video about color palettes for adult coloring. I hope that this video has been helpful. Thank you, and hope that you enjoy.